Hello. On my birthday, I received a video of my wife with her ex. My daughter even said she wished he was her dad. So I filed for divorce and removed both of them from my life. My name is Luke. I am 38 and I work as a civil engineer focused on municipal road projects. I live in Chicago and most of my weeks run on early mornings, site visits, and long stretches reviewing plans at my desk. My routine is steady and predictable. I leave home around 7. Spend the day dealing with contractors and inspections around the city, and I am usually back before dinner unless a project is falling behind schedule. My wife is Layla. She is 36 and works part-time managing a small boutique not far from downtown. We had been together for 8 years and married for 6. Layla has a daughter named Kayla from a previous relationship. Kayla is 10 now, and I have been in her life since she was 4. All 3 of us live together in a small house on the northwest side of Chicago that we bought about 3 years ago. For most of that time, I tried to keep things stable at home. Layla has always had a sharp personality. I noticed that pretty early on. She can be sarcastic, impatient, and quick to criticize people around her. At first, I assumed it came from stress. She raised Kayla mostly on her own before we met and worked a lot of retail hours. But after a few years, I realized it was not temporary. It was just how she operated. The issue was not occasional arguments. Everyone has those. The issue was that almost anything could turn into a complaint if she was in the mood for it. My work schedule, the way I organized things around the house, the fact that I preferred quiet weekends instead of constant plans. I did not ignore it. When something crossed a line, I addressed it directly. I made it clear that constant disrespect was not something I was going to tolerate in my own home. Usually she would pull back for a while after that. Despite all of that, Kayla and I actually got along well for most of those years. I drove her to soccer practice, helped with homework, and showed up at school events when Layla had late shifts. So going into my 38th birthday last fall, I thought things were at least stable. That day started completely normal. Work was busy but manageable. A couple inspections, a contractor meeting, then paperwork back at the office. Around lunch, my phone buzzed with a message from a number I did not recognize. It contained a single video file. At first, I assumed it was spam. Then I opened it. The video opened immediately. It was recorded in what looked like someone's living room. At first, the camera was shaky, like whoever filmed it had just started recording without thinking much about it. Then the frame settled. Layla was sitting on a couch. That alone confused me because I knew she was supposed to be working that afternoon. Her shift at the boutique usually ran until 5. But that was not the part that made my stomach drop. Next to her was a man I recognized almost instantly from old photos I had seen years ago. Her ex Kayla's biological father. His name is Owen. He had been mostly absent since before Layla and I started dating. From everything Layla told me, he drifted in and out of jobs and cities and rarely kept contact for long. I had met him exactly once at a school event years earlier. He barely spoke to me and left after about 10 minutes. In the video, he looked comfortable. Too comfortable. They were sitting close together on the couch like people who had not been estranged for years. The video ran for maybe 20 seconds before either of them noticed they were being filmed. And then I heard Kayla's voice behind the camera. She sounded excited, almost laughing. She said something that made me pause the video immediately. She said she wished Owen was her real dad. Not stepdad. Not anything else. Just dad. For a minute, I just sat there in my office chair staring at my phone like my brain had stopped processing information properly. There are moments where you know something is wrong, but you still try to organize it logically before reacting. That was where my head went first. Maybe this was old. Maybe someone sent me something recorded years ago. Maybe Layla had run into him recently, and Kayla got emotional about it. All of those explanations crossed my mind in about 30 seconds. Then I played the video again. And the second time I noticed 2 things that removed most of the doubt. First was Layla's outfit. She was wearing the exact same sweater she had left the house in that morning. The second thing was the date on the television screen behind them. It was displaying the local news broadcast. And the date in the corner was today. My birthday. Once I noticed the date on the TV screen, the situation stopped being theoretical. It was happening that day. I replayed the video a third time, slower this time, paying attention to details instead of reacting emotionally. Layla was leaning against Owen in a way that did not look accidental. His arm was resting along the back of the couch behind her shoulders. Not fully around her, but close enough that the intent was obvious. They both looked relaxed. Not like 2 people who had randomly run into each other after years. More like people who had been sitting there for a while. Kayla's voice came from behind the camera again. She sounded excited, like she had been waiting for this moment. She said something about how it was the best birthday surprise ever. That part confused me for a second. Then it clicked. They were not talking about my birthday. They were talking about Owen's. The video ended shortly after that. Layla noticed the phone pointing at them and asked Kayla what she was doing. Kayla laughed and said she was sending it to someone. Then the clip cut off. I checked the message again. The number that sent it still had no name attached. No explanation. Just the video file. I sat there for a few minutes thinking through the logistics. Layla had told me she was working that afternoon. Instead, she was clearly somewhere else with Owen. Kayla was with them. And somehow that video had been sent directly to me, which meant someone there knew exactly who I was. The easiest explanation was that Kayla had sent it herself. Kids are careless with phones and messages. She might not have realized what she was doing, but the tone in her voice did not sound accidental. It sounded intentional. I texted Layla once. I kept it simple. I asked where she was. Her response came about 3 minutes later. She said she was at work and that the shop was slow. At that point, I already knew that was a lie. So instead of arguing through text, I closed the conversation and opened the video again. There was one more detail I wanted to confirm. I zoomed in on the background, and that was when I recognized the apartment. The apartment in the background looked familiar almost immediately. At first, I could not place it. It was just a living room with beige walls, a dark couch, and a cheap TV stand. Nothing about it was unique. But the longer I stared at the frame, the more certain I became that I had seen that room before. Then I remembered where. About 2 years earlier, Layla had shown me pictures from Kayla's old birthday party. It was one of the few times Owen had actually shown up for something. Layla complained about it at the time because he had arrived late and left early. The photos from that party were taken in that same apartment, Owen's apartment, which meant this was not some random place they had met up. Layla had gone directly to his place. I leaned back in my chair and tried to organize what I actually knew versus what I was assuming. Fact 1. Layla told me she was at work. Fact 2. The video showed her sitting on a couch in Owen's apartment. Fact 3. Kayla was clearly comfortable being there. Fact 4. Someone intentionally sent that video to my phone. Those 4 things were enough to establish one simple reality. Layla was lying about where she was and who she was with. I did not call her again. Instead, I finished the rest of my work for the afternoon. Not because I was calm about the situation, but because reacting immediately would not change anything. Leaving the office early and driving across the city without a plan would just turn it into a scene. So I waited. Around 5:30, Layla texted me saying she was leaving work and asking what I wanted for dinner since it was my birthday. The message was casual, like nothing unusual had happened that day. That alone told me something important. She did not think I knew. I answered with one sentence. I told her I would just grab something on the way home. Then I drove back to the house like any normal evening. But before I walked inside, I watched the video one more time. This time I paid attention to Layla's face. And what stood out was not guilt. It was how comfortable she looked sitting next to Owen. When I walked into the house that evening, Layla was already in the kitchen. She was moving around like it was a normal weekday. Stove on. Grocery bags on the counter. Kayla sitting at the table doing homework. Layla looked up when I came in. She smiled and said happy birthday. Nothing about her tone suggested she had spent the afternoon at another man's apartment. That level of normal behavior actually made the situation clearer for me. It meant whatever was going on had been happening long enough that she was comfortable lying about it. I set my keys down and greeted Kayla first. She said happy birthday too, but she barely looked up from her notebook. Layla asked what I wanted for dinner. I told her anything simple was fine. The whole exchange lasted maybe 30 seconds. Then I went upstairs and changed out of my work clothes. While I was in the bedroom, I checked the video again. Not because I needed confirmation anymore, but because I wanted to think through my next step before I confronted anyone. Walking downstairs and starting a fight without a plan was pointless. There were a few things I needed to understand first. The biggest question was Owen. According to Layla, he barely contacted them anymore. She had told me multiple times that he was unreliable and rarely showed interest in Kayla. But the video suggested something different. Kayla looked completely comfortable filming them. Layla looked comfortable sitting next to him. And Owen looked like he belonged there. That combination does not happen from a single random visit. It happens when people have been seeing each other repeatedly. After a few minutes, I went back downstairs. Dinner was already on the table. Layla had made pasta and opened a bottle of wine. She slid a glass toward me like this was a normal birthday dinner. We ate for about 10 minutes before I said anything about the video. I did not raise my voice. I just took my phone out, set it on the table, and played the clip. Kayla froze almost instantly. Layla looked at the screen, and for the first time that evening, the expression on her face changed. The video finished playing, and the room went quiet. Kayla stared at the table like she had suddenly remembered something important about her homework. Layla looked at my phone for a few seconds, then leaned back in her chair. The first thing she did was sigh. Not panic, not shock, annoyance. She asked where I got that video. I told her it was sent to me earlier that afternoon. She glanced at Kayla immediately after I said that. Kayla kept staring at the table. Layla muttered something under her breath and shook her head. Then she looked back at me and said it was not what it looked like. I did not interrupt her. I wanted to hear exactly what explanation she thought made sense. She said Owen had reached out recently because he wanted to see Kayla more often. According to her, they had been meeting occasionally so he could spend time with his daughter. She said today was his birthday, and Kayla wanted to surprise him by stopping by after school. That was the version she went with. The problem was she delivered it with the same irritated tone she used when complaining about traffic or slow service at a restaurant. Like the real problem was that I had the video, not that the situation existed. I asked her one simple question. Why did she tell me she was at work? Layla rolled her eyes when I said that. She said she knew I would overreact if I heard Owen was around again. That was the moment the conversation stopped being productive, because that response was not an apology. It was a justification. I asked how long she had been seeing him. She hesitated for about 2 seconds before answering. Then she said a few weeks. That was the second lie of the conversation. You do not reach the level of comfort I saw in that video after a few casual meetups. Kayla finally spoke at that point. She said it was not a big deal and that Owen was fun to hang out with. Then she said something that made the entire table go silent again. She said she wished Owen lived with us instead, and that she wished he was her dad again. When Kayla said that, the room went completely quiet. Not awkward quiet. The kind where something shifts permanently and everyone in the room feels it. I looked at her for a few seconds. She did not look nervous or embarrassed. If anything, she looked irritated, like I was the one making things uncomfortable. Layla immediately told her to stop talking. Not because what Kayla said was wrong, but because the timing was bad. Then Layla looked back at me and started explaining again. She said Kayla was just excited because Owen had started showing up again. She said kids say things like that, and that I should not take it personally. That was the moment the situation became very simple for me. I was not going to sit there and debate whether I should feel disrespected in my own house. I pushed my chair back and stood up. Layla asked what I was doing. I told her we needed to talk in the living room. She followed me, already annoyed, like this was an inconvenience. Once we were in the living room, I kept everything direct. I told her I had already made a decision. I was filing for divorce. At first, she just stared at me like she was waiting for the punchline. When it became obvious I was serious, her expression changed from confusion to anger. She asked if I was out of my mind. I told her the house was in my name. I bought it before we got married and never added anyone else to the title. Legally, that made things straightforward. I told her she needed to start looking for somewhere else to live, because once the divorce process started, they would not be staying in my house. Layla immediately started arguing. She said I could not just throw away a marriage over one misunderstanding. She said I was overreacting and punishing Kayla for something she said without thinking. I let her finish. Then I reminded her of the video, the lie about being at work, and the fact that her daughter just said she wished another man was her father while sitting at my dinner table. I told her I was not interested in repairing any of that. I was done. After I said I was filing for divorce, the conversation stopped being productive. Layla shifted straight into anger. Not shock, not regret, just anger that I had drawn a hard line. She started listing all the reasons I was being unreasonable. She said I was blowing one situation out of proportion. She said Owen being around did not automatically mean anything was happening. Then she tried switching tactics. She said I was being cruel to Kayla. I told her the situation had nothing to do with punishing a 10-year-old. The issue was the environment that had been created behind my back and then brought into my house like it was normal. That was when she finally understood I was not going to argue for hours. I had already made the decision. Layla asked what exactly I expected her to do that night. I told her very clearly. She needed to pack what she and Kayla would need for the next few days and leave. She said she was not going anywhere. I reminded her again that the house legally belonged to me and that staying there after everything that had just happened was not an option. She stared at me for a long moment, trying to figure out if I would back down. I did not. Eventually, she walked upstairs without another word. I stayed in the living room while she packed. I could hear drawers opening and closing and bags being dragged across the floor. At one point, she slammed the bedroom door hard enough that I heard something fall against the wall. Kayla came downstairs about 20 minutes later with a backpack. She looked at me like she expected some kind of emotional reaction. I did not give one. I just told her to make sure she had everything she needed for school the next day. Layla came down a few minutes after that with 2 bags and her purse. Before leaving, she stopped at the doorway and said I was making the biggest mistake of my life. I told her she should probably head to Owen's place since they were already comfortable there. She did not respond to that. She just walked out the door with Kayla. And for the first time that entire day, the house was completely quiet. After they left, I locked the front door and stood in the hallway for a minute. The house felt strange. Not emotional, just quiet in a way it had not been in years. I walked through the rooms once just to clear my head. Kitchen, living room, upstairs hallway. Everything looked exactly the same as it had that morning, but the situation behind it was completely different. Then I sat down at the kitchen table and opened my phone. Layla had already sent 3 messages. The first one said I was acting insane and that we needed to talk like adults. The second one said Kayla was crying because she did not understand why she had to leave. The third message was longer and mostly complaints about how embarrassing the situation was. None of the messages mentioned the video. None of them mentioned Owen. That detail confirmed something for me. Layla still believed this situation could be argued back into normal if she just pushed hard enough. I was not interested in doing that. So I handled the practical steps first. I blocked her number. Then I blocked her on every app we normally use to communicate. Text, messaging apps, social media. It took about 2 minutes. Once that was done, I sat there for a second and thought about whether there was anything else I needed to address immediately. There really was not. The marriage was effectively over the moment I watched that video earlier in the day. The conversation at dinner only confirmed it. Layla lying about where she was. Her being comfortable at Owen's place. Kayla openly wishing another man was her father while sitting in my house. That combination removed any reason to keep negotiating. I sent one message to my lawyer explaining that I needed to start the divorce process as soon as possible. Then I turned my phone face down on the table. And for the first time all day, I stopped thinking about Layla entirely. The next morning I woke up earlier than usual. Not because of stress. Mostly because the house was completely quiet. No movement upstairs. No one getting ready for school. No background noise from the kitchen. Just silence. I made coffee and sat at the table for a while going through the practical things that needed to happen next. First was the legal side. My lawyer responded to my message around 8 in the morning. I explained the situation briefly and told him I wanted to move forward with filing for divorce as soon as possible. He told me we could start the paperwork that week. The second thing was access to the house. Layla still technically had a key, but that was easy to solve. I called a locksmith that morning and scheduled a lock change for the afternoon. It was not dramatic. Just a simple precaution to avoid future arguments about who could come and go. After that, I went to work like a normal day. Around lunch, I noticed several missed calls from unknown numbers. I already knew who it was without answering. Layla had probably realized she was blocked and started using other phones. I ignored them. Later that evening, I heard from a mutual friend who told me Layla had been telling people I kicked her and Kayla out over nothing. I did not bother correcting the story. Anyone who actually knew me well enough would understand that I do not make decisions like that without a reason. And the truth was simple. On my birthday, I received a video showing my wife sitting comfortably at her ex's apartment while lying about being at work. In the same video, the child I had been helping raise for 6 years said she wished he was her dad. After that, the situation was clear. I removed both of them from my life the same day, and I have not spoken to either of them since. Bye-bye.